Princess Zarathul of the Veltaran Empire stood at the edge of the crystalline platform, her silver hair flowing in the artificial wind generated by the Academy's atmospheric processors. The Galactic Diplomatic Academy on Nexus Prime was supposed to be neutral ground, a place where the children of various species could learn to coexist and negotiate. But neutrality meant nothing when your empire was crumbling from within. The message crystal in her palm pulsed with urgent red light, containing the latest reports from her homeworld. The Veltaran military had suffered 3 consecutive defeats against the expanding Krex dominion. Her father, Emperor Velnash, was growing desperate. The once mighty empire that had ruled over 47 star systems for 3 millennia was now reduced to defending their core worlds. Zarathul had been sent to the Academy 2 years ago, officially to study interspecies relations and diplomatic protocol. Unofficially, she knew her father hoped she would forge alliances that could save their empire. But after countless formal dinners, cultural exchange programs, and diplomatic simulations, she had made no meaningful connections. The other species viewed the Veltaran as proud and arrogant, unwilling to compromise or adapt. The truth was more complex. The Veltaran culture valued honor and tradition above all else. To ask for help was seen as weakness. To admit failure was unthinkable. And yet here she was contemplating the unthinkable. "Your Highness?" The voice belonged to Counselor Vexian, her Altarian advisor. His blue skin had a worried tint, and his forearms gestured nervously. "The emergency council session begins in 20 minutes. The Krex ambassador has requested an audience." Zarathul's stomach tightened. Ambassador Golrex had been circling like a predator for months, offering terms for Veltaran's surrender that became more insulting with each iteration. The latest proposal would reduce her people to a client species, stripped of their fleet, their colonies, and their dignity. She walked through the Academy's corridors, her ceremonial robes rustling against the polished floors. Students from dozens of species moved aside respectfully, though she caught whispers in various languages. Everyone knew why she was here. Everyone knew her empire was dying. The council chamber was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate the environmental needs of multiple species simultaneously. The Veltaran section featured the warm, golden lighting that reminded her of home. Across the chamber, the Krex delegation sat in their preferred dim, humid environment, their reptilian forms barely visible in the shadows. Ambassador Golrex rose as she entered, his massive frame towering even in the low gravity. His scales glistened with moisture and his yellow eyes fixed on her with predatory hunger. "Princess Zarathul, how gracious of you to attend. Ambassador." She kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I assume you have new terms to discuss?" "Indeed." He gestured to his aide, who activated a holographic display. "The Dominion Council has grown impatient with these negotiations. Our forces now control the Kelstar system and are advancing on Veltara Prime. We offer one final opportunity for peaceful resolution." The hologram showed a treaty document that made her previous stomach tightening feel like a gentle squeeze. Complete military disarmament, removal of all Veltaran leadership, integration of their people as laborers in Krex industrial complexes. It wasn't surrender. It was extinction with paperwork. "These terms are unacceptable," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. What choice did they have? Her father's last message had been clear. If diplomacy failed, he would rather die fighting than see his people enslaved. But she could see the mathematics of warfare as clearly as any general. The Veltaran fleet was outnumbered 4-1. Their colonies were isolated and defenseless. Pride would not deflect plasma cannons or stop Krex battlecruisers. "Perhaps," Golrex said, leaning forward. "But acceptable and realistic are different things. You have 48 standard hours to provide an answer. After that, our fleets will ensure the matter is settled permanently." The weight of 40 billion lives pressed down on her shoulders. 40 billion Veltaran citizens who looked to the imperial family for protection. 40 billion souls who would either live as slaves or die as free beings, depending on her decision. As the formal session ended and delegates began filing out, she remained seated, staring at the treaty terms hovering in the hologram. The mathematics were simple. Sign and her people lived, albeit in chains. Refuse and they died with honor intact. There had to be another option, but 2 years at the Academy had shown her the political reality. No species would risk war with the Dominion to save the Veltaran. Not the proud Altarians, not the merchant Zorvak, not even the supposedly noble Etherians. Tough choice? The voice was unfamiliar, speaking in standard galactic with an odd accent she couldn't place. She looked up to see a young bipedal figure approaching. The being was shorter than most species, with pale skin, dark hair, and unusual round eyes. She had seen this species around the academy, but had never spoken with any of them directly. "I am sorry, but I do not believe we have been introduced," she said formally. "Marcus Chen," he replied, extending his hand in what she recognized as a human greeting gesture. "Third-year diplomatic studies, Earth Coalition, and you're dealing with the kind of problem that keeps people awake at night." Earth Coalition. She had heard of them, a recent addition to galactic politics, a young species that had achieved faster-than-light travel only decades ago. They controlled exactly one star system and had perhaps a few hundred ships in their entire fleet. What could they possibly understand about the weight of empire? "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but this is a matter of some complexity." Marcus sat down across from her, apparently unbothered by protocol or the fact that she hadn't invited him to join her. "Mind if I take a look at those terms?" Before she could object, he was studying the holographic display with surprising intensity. His expression grew darker as he read through the document. "This isn't a treaty," he said finally. "It's a bill of sale. They're buying your people like property." The blunt assessment stung because it was accurate. The situation is what it is. Sometimes survival requires difficult choices. Does it, though? Marcus looked at her directly, and she was surprised by the intensity in his eyes. "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like you're about to fold a winning hand." The statement was so absurd she almost laughed. "Winning? My empire has lost 3 major battles. Our fleet is outnumbered. Our colonies are defenseless. How exactly is this winning?" Marcus smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. Something that reminded her of the predatory look in Golrex's eyes, but different. Hungrier. "Princess, has anyone ever told you about human military history?" Princess Zarathul stared at the young human, uncertain whether to be offended or intrigued. "I fail to see how the military history of a species that has been spacefaring for mere decades could apply to our current situation." Marcus leaned back in his chair, that unsettling smile still playing across his features. "See, that's where you're wrong. Being new to space doesn't mean we're new to war. Humans have been fighting each other for our entire recorded history. We've gotten very, very good at it." He gestured to the holographic treaty terms. "The Kreks are making a classic mistake. They're fighting the last war, not this one. They see your traditional fleet formations, your honor-bound military doctrine, your predictable strategies, and they think they have you figured out." "They do have us figured out," Zarathul said bitterly. 3 defeats prove that. No, 3 defeats prove that fighting the Kreks like a traditional Veltaran empire doesn't work. "But you're not just a Veltaran empire anymore, are you?" Marcus stood and began pacing, his energy infectious despite her skepticism. "You're here at a galactic academy, learning about other species, other ways of thinking. You have access to resources your ancestors never dreamed of." He stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "Tell me, what do you know about asymmetric warfare?" The term was unfamiliar. "I have not encountered this concept." "Right. Because your military doctrine is based on fleet-to-fleet engagement, honor duels on a massive scale. The Kreks adapted by simply building bigger fleets. But there are other ways to fight." Marcus activated his personal datapad and projected a series of historical images. Zarathul saw primitive human vehicles, soldiers in basic armor, and what appeared to be ruined cities. "This is from something we called the Vietnam War," he explained. "A technologically superior force with better equipment, more firepower, and numerical advantage was defeated by a smaller, supposedly primitive enemy." "Want to know how?" Despite herself, Zarathul found herself leaning forward. "How?" "They refused to fight on the superior force's terms. Instead of meeting them in open battle where they would be crushed, they used hit-and-run tactics, sabotage, intelligence networks, and political pressure. They made the cost of occupation higher than the value of victory." The implications began forming in her mind, but they seemed impossible. "You are suggesting we abandon our principles of honorable warfare." "I'm suggesting you abandon the warfare part altogether," Marcus said. "Princess, what does the Krex Dominion want from your empire?" She frowned at the obvious question. Our territory, our resources, our strategic positions. Wrong. His response was immediate and confident. They want those things intact. If they just wanted to destroy you, they would have bombarded your worlds from orbit. They want your infrastructure, your colonies, your trade routes. They want to absorb your empire, not obliterate it. Marcus began manipulating the holographic display, overlaying star charts with economic data. Look at their expansion pattern. The Kreks don't destroy what they conquer. They integrate it. Their entire strategy depends on taking functional systems and adding them to their dominion. But what if those systems weren't functional when they arrived? Understanding dawned slowly. Sabotage, exactly, but not random destruction. Strategic degradation. Make occupation more expensive than the territories are worth. He pulled up more images from his datapad. Humans call it scorched earth tactics. If you can't defend it, make sure your enemy can't use it either. Zarathul felt a mixture of horror and fascination. This would mean abandoning our colonies, destroying our own infrastructure. Some of it, yes. But think long-term. The Kreks are overextended. They're fighting wars on multiple fronts, dealing with internal political pressures, managing a massive bureaucracy. Every system they conquer requires resources to control. Garrison fleets, administrative personnel, security forces. He gestured to the star charts. But what if the systems they conquered kept having problems? What if their communication networks failed regularly? What if their supply convoys disappeared? What if the local populations required constant monitoring because of terrorist activities? The word terrorist was unfamiliar, but she understood the concept. You are describing insurgency warfare. Insurgency, resistance, asymmetric conflict, whatever you want to call it. The point is you stop trying to match their strength and start exploiting their weaknesses. Marcus pulled up detailed economic projections. The Kreks economy is built on efficiency and resource extraction. They can afford to fight short, decisive wars, but not long, expensive occupations. Every month they spend garrisoning hostile territory costs them resources they could use elsewhere. Zarathul studied the data, her analytical mind racing through possibilities. But this would require coordination across multiple systems, supply networks, intelligence gathering. Our traditional military structure is not designed for such operations. Then change it. His response was immediate. Princess, you're thinking like an empire when you need to think like a movement. Decentralize command. Create independent cells that can operate without direct oversight. Train your people to be citizens first and soldiers second. The concept was revolutionary, almost heretical to Veltaran tradition. My people have served the imperial hierarchy for 3,000 years. Such a change would require abandoning fundamental aspects of our culture. Would it? Or would it require adapting your culture to survive? Marcus leaned forward, his intensity unmistakable. What matters more, Princess? Maintaining traditional power structures or ensuring your people have a future? She was quiet for a long moment, considering implications that seemed to cascade infinitely outward. Even if this approach had merit, implementing it would require resources, coordination, expertise we do not possess. But I know people who do. Marcus's smile returned, but now it seemed less predatory and more conspiratorial. The Earth Coalition might be small, but we've learned a lot about fighting bigger, stronger opponents. And we're very interested in preventing the Kreks from becoming too powerful. This was unexpected. Your government would support such activities? Not officially. But there are Earth military advisors who might be willing to take extended vacations in Veltaran space. Scientists who might want to study Kreks technology. Engineers who might be interested in infrastructure projects. Intelligence specialists who might want to observe Kreks operations firsthand. The scope of what he was proposing began to sink in. You are suggesting a completely different kind of war. I'm suggesting the only kind of war you can win, Marcus corrected. The Kreks are expecting you to either surrender or fight them traditionally. They're not prepared for a third option. Zarathul looked at the treaty terms still hovering in the hologram, then at the young human who had just presented her with an alternative she had never considered. The mathematics of conventional warfare remained unchanged, but the equation itself might be wrong. Such an approach would take time to implement, she said slowly. The Kreks expect an answer in 48 hours. Then we give them one. Marcus stood, his expression now purely business. You reject their terms publicly. citing Veltaran honor and tradition. Let them think they're facing the same kind of resistance they've already defeated. Meanwhile, we start building something they've never encountered before. The weight of decision pressed down on her again, but now it felt different. Instead of choosing between slavery and death, she was choosing between surrender and transformation. Both paths were terrifying, but only one offered hope. If we proceed with this approach, she said carefully, what would be the first step? Marcus grinned, and she realized that his predatory smile had never been directed at her. It was meant for their mutual enemies. We start by making some very unusual friends. The emergency meeting took place in Section C7 of the Academy, a maintenance area that most students avoided. Princess Zarathul had never realized how many species attended the Galactic Diplomatic Academy until she found herself surrounded by beings she had barely acknowledged. During her 2 years of formal education, Marcus had been busy during the 18 hours since their conversation. The assembly included representatives from nearly a dozen species, but not the ones she would have expected. No Altarians, Etherians, or other major powers. Instead, she found herself facing delegates from the Corvani Mining Consortium, the Hexapod Agricultural Collective, the Vorthon Technical Union, and other groups she had dismissed as minor players. Let me introduce everyone, Marcus said, taking the role of facilitator with surprising natural authority. Princess Zarathul, meet the real power players of the galaxy. A four-armed Corvani engineer named Thekvar gestured dismissively. Real power? My people operate asteroid mining platforms in 40 systems. When the major empires fight their wars, they still need our minerals. And our food production feeds half the galaxy, added Zilka, whose insectoid hexapod features were partially hidden by environmental gear. The Kreks may control the shipping lanes, but they cannot eat plasma cannons. Zarathul felt confused. I fail to understand how this relates to our situation. Marcus activated a portable holographic projector, displaying a complex network diagram. Princess, meet the galaxy's real infrastructure. While the major empires focus on military might and political prestige, these groups provide the foundation that everything else depends on. The diagram showed intricate connections between seemingly minor operations. Corvani mining platforms supplied raw materials to Vorthon manufacturing facilities, which produced components used by dozens of species. Hexapod agricultural colonies provided food to major population centers across multiple empires. Small shipping companies and independent traders carried goods through trade routes that major fleets ignored. The Kreks understand part of this, explained Captain Sarah Rodriguez, another human whom Marcus had apparently contacted through unofficial channels. They target military assets and political centers, but they assume the economic infrastructure will continue functioning under new management. Captain Rodriguez had the bearing of a military officer, though she wore civilian clothes. Her presence suggested that human involvement might be more official than Marcus had initially indicated. What if it didn't? Asked Dr. Gentar, a tall, thin Vorthon whose species was known for their analytical minds. What if the infrastructure began experiencing systematic failures immediately before or during Krek's occupation? Thekvar made a sound that Zarathul's translator interpreted as laughter. Mining equipment is very sensitive, requires constant maintenance. Would be tragic if key components suddenly became unavailable. Food production systems are even more delicate, Zilka added. Contamination, equipment failures, distribution problems. So many things can go wrong. The implications were staggering. You are proposing economic warfare on a galactic scale. We're proposing to protect our assets, Dr. Gentar corrected diplomatically. If the Kreks want to absorb our operations, they should understand the challenges involved in maintaining them. Marcus pulled up detailed economic projections. The Kreks Dominion's expansion strategy depends on rapid integration of conquered territories. They calculate the cost-benefit ratio based on minimal occupation requirements and immediate resource extraction. But what if those calculations were wrong? Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her expression serious. Princess, the Earth Coalition has been studying Kreks expansion patterns for the past 5 years. We've identified critical vulnerabilities in their operational model. She manipulated the display, highlighting supply lines and administrative centers. The Dominion operates on centralized control principles. Local commanders have limited autonomy. Decision-making flows through hierarchical channels. When things go wrong, they need approval from higher authorities before adapting. Humans adapt faster, Marcus added. Our military doctrine emphasizes individual initiative and flexible response. When your enemy needs permission to change tactics, you have a significant advantage. Zarathul studied the assembled representatives. Even if such coordination were possible, it would require massive changes to how we operate. The Veltaran military follows strict protocols, clear command structures. Then don't use the Veltaran military, suggested Commander Velnash, causing Zarathul to start in surprise. The voice belonged to her younger brother, Prince Kaelron, whom she had not seen enter the meeting area. Brother, how did you— Marcus contacted me through unofficial channels, he explained. Father doesn't know I'm here. Officially, I'm conducting a routine inspection of our embassy facilities. Prince Kaelron had always been the more flexible member of the imperial family, more interested in technology and innovation than tradition and protocol. His presence changed the dynamic of the entire discussion. I've been reviewing the intelligence data that Marcus provided, he continued. The strategic assessment is sound. Conventional resistance will fail, but unconventional approaches might succeed. He activated his own data projector, showing detailed analysis of Krek's military operations. Their ground forces are excellent at overwhelming organized resistance but poorly equipped for dealing with distributed threats. Their fleet doctrine assumes they will face traditional battle formations. Their administrative systems are designed for managing compliant populations. None of those assumptions apply to what we're discussing, Captain Rodriguez observed. Thekvar gestured toward the various species representatives. My mining operations already function as independent networks. Converting to resistance cells would require minimal structural changes. Agricultural distribution systems could be repurposed for moving people and equipment, Zilka added. Food convoys are rarely inspected carefully. Dr. Gentar nodded thoughtfully. Manufacturing facilities could produce different kinds of components. Communication networks could be modified for secure coordination. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Zarathul realized they were not just planning resistance to Krek's occupation. They were designing an entirely different kind of civilization, one based on distributed networks instead of centralized hierarchies. The political implications would be enormous, she said. If we succeed, it would fundamentally change how galactic society operates. Good, Marcus said bluntly. The current system is producing increasingly powerful empires that absorb smaller groups through military force. Maybe it's time for a different approach. Prince Kaelron looked directly at his sister. Zarathul, father sent me here with authority to negotiate emergency alliances. If you believe this approach has merit, I can commit Veltaran resources immediately. The weight of decision returned, but now it felt different. Instead of choosing between survival and honor, she was choosing between past and future. The proposal was radical, dangerous, and completely contrary to everything she had been taught about leadership and governance. It was also the only plan that offered hope. What would be required immediately? She asked. Captain Rodriguez smiled grimly. First, we reject the Krek's ultimatum publicly and prepare for invasion. Let them commit to the occupation they're expecting. Simultaneously, Marcus continued, we begin distributing key personnel and resources. Instead of concentrating our forces for a defensive battle we can't win, we scatter them for an offensive campaign that will last years. Most importantly, Dr. Gentar added, we establish communication networks that can coordinate activities across multiple systems without depending on any central authority. Zarathul looked around the room at the diverse group of beings who had somehow become her closest advisors, representatives of species she had barely noticed, planning a revolution that could reshape galactic civilization. How long do we have to implement these changes before the Krek's deadline? About 20 hours, Marcus replied. But we don't need to implement everything immediately. We just need to start the process and make sure the Krek's commitment to invasion is irreversible. Once they invade, Captain Rodriguez explained, they cannot withdraw without losing face throughout the galaxy. They will be committed to occupation regardless of cost. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. The Kreks expected either submission or traditional resistance. Instead, they would get something entirely unprecedented, a war that would cost them everything they had gained through 3 centuries of expansion. Brother, Zarathul said formally, I request that you contact Father immediately. Tell him we have found a path forward. Prince Kaelron nodded solemnly. And the Krek's ultimatum? She stood, her decision crystallizing into absolute certainty. We rejected all of it. And then we show them what humans call asymmetric warfare. The formal rejection ceremony took place in the Academy's main diplomatic hall, broadcast across the galaxy through official channels. Princess Zarathul stood at the ceremonial podium, wearing the full regalia of Velteran royalty, speaking words that would either doom her people or transform them forever. The Veltaran Empire, she announced to the assembled ambassadors and media representatives, rejects the terms offered by the Krex Dominion in their entirety. We choose honor over survival, dignity over slavery. If the Krex wish to claim our worlds, they will take them through force of arms, not through our submission. Ambassador Gulrex rose from his delegation, his massive form radiating satisfaction. Then you have chosen death, Princess. Our fleets will begin their advance within the hour. So be it, she replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was unleashing. What the assembled delegates could not see was the frantic activity taking place behind the scenes. Even as she spoke those formal words of defiance, the real war was already beginning through channels the Krex had never imagined. Marcus sat in the Academy's communications center, coordinating with contacts throughout human space. The Earth Coalition had been preparing for this moment since their first intelligence reports on Krex expansion patterns. While officially maintaining neutrality, they had been positioning assets for months. Operation Dandelion is active, he spoke into his encrypted transmitter. Seed dispersal begins immediately. Across the galaxy, seemingly routine cargo shipments began deviating from their scheduled routes. Corvani mining equipment included unexpected additional components. Hexapod agricultural shipments contained non-standard biological samples. Forthan technical specialists suddenly found reasons to visit remote facilities throughout Velteran space. Captain Rodriguez supervised the military aspects of the deployment from a concealed command center that had been established in the Academy's lower levels. Her screens showed the movement of hundreds of small vessels, each carrying personnel and equipment that would be critical for the coming resistance operations. Package Alpha is en route to Kelstar system, reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson, another human officer who had arrived at the Academy under diplomatic cover. Insertion team includes 2 demolition specialists, 1 communications expert, and 1 psychological operations coordinator. Package Beta reaches Velterra, prime in 6 hours, added Major Kim. Advanced reconnaissance and network establishment. The packages contained more than personnel. Each included manufacturing templates for producing improvised weapons, communication equipment specifications that could be assembled from commercial components, and, most importantly, detailed tactical manuals translated into Veltaran cultural concepts. Prince Kaelron monitored the coordination from his embassy offices, maintaining official communication with his father, while secretly directing the transformation of Veltaran society. The challenge was enormous, converting a hierarchical military organization into a distributed resistance network within hours. Father is mobilizing the fleet for defensive operations, he reported during an encrypted conference with Zarathul and Marcus. He believes we are preparing for a traditional last stand. Let him believe it, Marcus replied. The Krex are monitoring our communications. They need to see exactly what they expect to see. The deception was multi-layered. While official Veltaran channels showed standard military preparations, hidden networks were distributing entirely different instructions. Selected officers received coded messages directing them to predetermined locations, where human advisors would brief them on unconventional warfare techniques. Civilian administrators got supply lists for equipment that had nothing to do with traditional defense. Dr. Gentar's technical specialists worked frantically to establish communication protocols that could operate independently of standard galactic networks. The system they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of relying on dedicated military channels, it used the background noise of commercial communications, hiding messages within routine business transactions and personal correspondence. The beauty of this approach, explained Dr. Gentar to Zarathul during one of their hurried planning sessions, is that the Krex cannot shut it down without disrupting all galactic commerce. Their own economic interests will protect our communication network. Meanwhile, Thekvar's mining operations began implementing what they called equipment repositioning. Critical mining machinery was moved to new locations, ostensibly for maintenance but actually to establish hidden manufacturing facilities. The same equipment that extracted minerals from asteroids could be reconfigured to produce weapons and equipment for resistance operations. Mining platforms are perfect bases, Tekevar explained to Marcus. They are mobile, self-sufficient, and the Kreks will assume they are non-combatant commercial operations. Zilka's agricultural network served a different but equally important function. Food distribution systems provided perfect cover for moving personnel and equipment between systems. More importantly, they controlled something the Kreks would need immediately: the ability to feed occupation forces and administrative personnel. Agricultural infrastructure requires constant technical support, Zilka noted during one planning session. Many opportunities for sabotage that will appear to be maintenance failures. The most crucial element was timing. The resistance network had to be largely in place before Kreks forces arrived, but the deployment had to appear routine enough not to trigger suspicions. The solution was elegant. Everything was happening through existing commercial relationships and routine activities. As the 48-hour deadline approached, Zarathul found herself in the strange position of preparing for two completely different wars simultaneously. Officially, she was coordinating with her father's military commanders for a final defensive battle. Unofficially, she was overseeing the creation of a resistance network that would continue fighting long after that battle was lost. Status. Report, she requested during a final coordination meeting in the concealed command center. Captain. Rodriguez consulted her displays. 73% of primary assets are in position. Communication networks are established and tested. Supply caches are distributed across 47 locations. Human advisory teams are embedded with local commanders. Critical infrastructure mapping is complete, Dr. Gentar added. We have identified key choke points in Krek supply lines and administrative systems. Sabotage operations can begin immediately upon occupation. Marcus looked up from his own coordination efforts. Princess, we need to discuss timing for the transition from conventional to unconventional warfare. This was the most delicate aspect of the entire operation. The Veltaran fleet would fight bravely but briefly against overwhelming Kreks forces. The defeat had to appear complete and final, convincing the Kreks that organized resistance had been eliminated. Only then could the real war begin. The fleet will engage the Kreks advance forces at the Helios system, Prince Kelleron reported. Father has chosen this location for maximum symbolic impact. It was the site of our greatest victory 300 years ago. And it will be the site of our greatest defeat, Zarathul said quietly. How many ships will be lost? Most of them, her brother replied honestly. Father knows this is a final battle. He intends to die with honor, taking as many Krek ships as possible. The personal cost was staggering. Thousands of Veltaran warriors would die in a battle that was fundamentally a deception, but without their sacrifice, the Kreks would never believe the Empire had truly fallen. Can we minimize casualties without compromising the deception? Zarathul asked. Marcus shook his head. The defeat has to be convincing. If too many ships escape, the Kreks will assume there are hidden fleets waiting to continue conventional resistance. Captain Rodriguez offered a grim alternative. Some ships could suffer catastrophic failures that require evacuation. Crews could be transferred to other vessels before battle stations. Skeleton crews could maintain the deception. It was still a terrible cost, but better than total annihilation. Zarathul authorized the modification, knowing she was condemning hundreds to death to save thousands. As the deadline approached, she stood once again at the crystalline platform where this had all begun. The message crystal in her palm now pulsed with confirmations instead of desperate pleas. Across multiple star systems, representatives of species she had never imagined working with were implementing a plan that defied every assumption about galactic warfare. The Kreks expected to face an empire. Instead, they would encounter something entirely new. A distributed resistance that grew stronger through persecution and became more dangerous the more they tried to control it. The princess who had been ready to yield was gone. In her place stood a revolutionary who was about to unleash forces that would reshape the galaxy. The Battle of Helios lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Princess Zarathul watched it unfold through long-range sensors from the Academy, her heart breaking with each Veltaran ship that disappeared from the tactical displays. Her father's flagship, the Eternal Honor, fought until the very end, ramming a Krex dreadnought in a final gesture of defiance that lit up the darkness of space like a dying star. Emperor Velnash died as he had lived, with honor intact and enemies before him. The Krex reported his death across all galactic networks, proclaiming the end of the Veltaran Empire and the beginning of Krex occupation. What they did not report was that nearly 30% of the Veltaran fleet had somehow survived the battle. Their crews transferred to civilian vessels that had fled before the engagement began. Phase 1 complete, Captain Rodriguez reported grimly. Conventional resistance has been eliminated. Krex forces are advancing on all Veltaran worlds. Marcus monitored incoming intelligence from their embedded networks. They're moving faster than anticipated. Occupation forces are landing on Veltara Prime now. Through their concealed communication channels, they watch the Krex implement their standard occupation protocol. Military governors took control of major cities. Administrative specialists began cataloging resources and infrastructure. Garrison fleets positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the system. Everything proceeded exactly according to Krex doctrine, which meant exactly according to the Resistance plan. Resistance Cell Alpha. Confirm status. Zarathul spoke into her encrypted communicator. This is Commander Thane, came the reply from Veltara Prime's capital city. Commander Thane had been one of her father's most trusted officers, a career military leader who had adapted to unconventional warfare with surprising flexibility. Krex forces have established headquarters in the Imperial Palace. Administrative operations beginning tomorrow. Understood. Execute Protocol 7 in 48 hours. Acknowledged, Your Highness. Protocol 7 was elegant in its psychological impact. The Krex would spend 2 days establishing their administrative systems, installing their personnel, and beginning the process of integration. They would start to feel secure, confident that occupation was proceeding smoothly. Then the infrastructure would begin to fail. Dr. Gentar's technical specialists had spent weeks studying Krex administrative procedures. They had identified critical dependencies that the occupying forces would not immediately understand. Power distribution networks designed for Veltaran energy requirements would prove incompatible with Krex equipment. Communication systems would experience mysterious interference. Transportation infrastructure would suffer increasing maintenance problems. The key, Dr. Gentar had explained, is to make the failures appear systemic rather than deliberate. The Krex must believe they are dealing with incompatibility issues, not sabotage. Meanwhile, Thekvar's mining operations began implementing their own phase of the resistance. Asteroid mining platforms throughout Veltaran space suddenly discovered that their equipment required extensive maintenance. Production schedules fell behind. Shipments were delayed. Quality control problems emerged. Industrial accidents are very common in mining operations, Thekvar had noted with what passed for humor among his species. So many dangerous processes, so much complex machinery. The cumulative effect was subtle but devastating. The Krex had calculated occupation costs based on maintaining existing production levels with minimal administrative overhead. Instead, they found themselves dealing with constant crises that required increasing numbers of specialists and resources. Zilka's agricultural networks provided the most immediate pressure. Food production facilities experienced contamination issues that required extensive decontamination procedures. Distribution systems suffered routing problems that delayed deliveries. Storage facilities discovered pest infestations that threatened entire harvests. Biological systems are very delicate, Zilka had observed. Small changes can have large consequences. The genius of the approach became apparent within the first week of occupation. Each individual problem seemed routine, the kind of challenge that any administrative system might face. But the cumulative impact was overwhelming. Krex administrators found themselves spending all their time managing crises instead of implementing policy. More importantly, they began requesting additional resources from the Dominion Central Command. Intelligence indicates the Krex have increased garrison forces by 30%, Marcus reported during a resistance coordination meeting. They're also requesting technical specialists to address infrastructure problems. Captain Rodriguez smiled grimly. They're doing exactly what we predicted, escalating commitment to protect their initial investment. This was the trap's closing mechanism. The more resources the Krex committed to making occupation work, the more they had to lose if occupation failed. They could not withdraw without admitting that their expansion model was flawed. But continuing occupation was becoming prohibitively expensive. Prince Kaileron, now operating under the identity of a minor trade administrator, provided intelligence from within Krex-controlled territory. Their governors are reporting to Dominion Command that Veltaran systems require extensive modification to be profitable. They're requesting engineering teams and additional funding. How is Central Command responding? Zarathul asked, increasing frustration. The Krex economy is built on rapid integration and immediate resource extraction. Extended occupation costs were never part of their calculations. The resistance was succeeding beyond their most optimistic projections. But success brought new challenges. As Krex forces increased their presence, resistance operations became more dangerous. Several cells had been discovered and eliminated. The human advisors had proven invaluable in adapting tactics to changing circumstances. We need to escalate, Marcus argued during one particularly intense planning session. The Krex are starting to suspect coordination. If we don't increase pressure now, they'll adapt their procedures. Escalation means moving from sabotage to direct action, Captain Rodriguez warned. That changes everything. Once we start killing Krex personnel, they'll respond with massive retaliation. Zarathul studied the tactical displays showing resistance activities across multiple systems. The network they had built was impressive, but it remained vulnerable to systematic suppression if the Krex decided to abandon their integration strategy in favor of pure military control. What does escalation look like? She asked. Marcus activated a series of tactical projections. We target their command structure directly. Assassinations, bombings, raids on administrative centers. Force them to treat every Veltaran civilian as a potential threat. That will result in massive civilian casualties, Prince Kaileron objected. Yes, Marcus agreed bluntly, but it will also make occupation impossible. The Krex cannot administer territory where they cannot trust anyone. The moral calculus was horrifying but clear. Continued low-level resistance would eventually be suppressed. Escalation would cost thousands of lives but might save millions. The princess who had once valued honor above all else now had to choose between mercy and victory. There is another consideration, Dr. Gentar noted. Intelligence indicates that other species are watching our resistance operations. If we demonstrate that Krex occupation can be made impossibly expensive, it may deter future expansion. The implications extended beyond the Veltaran Empire. Their resistance was becoming a proof of concept for the entire galaxy. Success here could inspire resistance movements throughout Krex-controlled space. Failure would confirm that the Dominion was unstoppable. Zarathul made her decision with the same clarity she had felt when rejecting the original ultimatum. We escalate. But we do it intelligently. Target military and administrative personnel only. Minimize civilian casualties wherever possible. And we coordinate the escalation with our allies. Our allies? Captain Rodriguez asked. Marcus smiled with that predatory expression she had come to recognize. Did you think humans were the only species concerned about Krex expansion? We've been very busy making new friends. He activated a galactic communication channel that showed representatives from nearly 20 different species, including several from major powers that had previously maintained strict neutrality. Princess Zarathul, came a familiar voice. This is Ambassador Velkaran of the Altarian Republic. We understand you might be interested in expanded cooperation regarding mutual security concerns. The resistance had become something larger than anyone had initially imagined. What began as a desperate attempt to save one dying empire was evolving into a galactic coalition against Krex hegemony. The princess who had been ready to yield was now leading a revolution that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Ambassador Velkaran, she replied formally. The Veltaran resistance would be very interested in discussing such cooperation. The war was entering a new phase, one that the Krex had never anticipated and for which they were completely unprepared. The assassination of General Krexmoth marked the beginning of what historians would later call the Cascade Wars. The Krex military governor of Veltara Prime died when his armored transport exploded during a routine inspection tour, killed by a bomb planted by a resistance cell that included 2 former Imperial guards, a human demolitions expert, and a Corvani engineer who had volunteered for the mission. The explosion was visible from orbit, a column of fire that announced to the galaxy that the Veltaran resistance had moved beyond sabotage to direct military action. The Krek's response was swift and brutal. Martial law was declared across all occupied territories, with mass arrests and public executions intended to terrorize the population into submission. Instead, it triggered exactly the reaction Marcus had predicted during their planning sessions. "They're doing our recruiting for us," he observed during an encrypted communication with resistance leadership. "Every public execution creates 10 new resistance members. Every mass arrest demonstrates that collaboration offers no protection." Princess Zarathul monitored the escalation from her new headquarters, a mobile command center disguised as a civilian research vessel. She had abandoned the academy weeks earlier, officially to mourn her father's death in private meditation. In reality, she was coordinating a resistance network that now spanned 47 star systems and included representatives from 18 different species. Intelligence reports from Sector 7, Captain Rodriguez announced, reading from encrypted data streams. Krek's garrison forces have increased to 4 times original projections. They're requesting additional reinforcements and threatening to declare full military administration. "Casualties?" Zarathul asked, heavy on both sides. "We've lost 12 resistance cells this week, but Krek's administrative casualties are approaching critical levels. They can barely maintain basic governance functions." The mathematics of occupation were working exactly as the human advisors had predicted. Every Krek's administrator killed required replacement by someone from outside the occupied territory. Every security measure implemented required additional personnel. Every act of resistance demanded investigation and response. The Krek's dominion was discovering that ruling through force was exponentially more expensive than ruling through cooperation. "Status report from our new allies?" Zarathul requested. Marcus activated the Galactic Communication Network, which now included official representatives from 6 major powers and unofficial contacts from dozens of smaller groups. The Altarian Republic had been the first to offer support, providing intelligence and logistics coordination. The Etherian Confederacy had followed, contributing advanced communication technology and strategic planning expertise. Most surprisingly, the Zorvak Merchant Union had joined the coalition, offering something invaluable: economic warfare capabilities. "The Zorvak report significant progress," Marcus announced. "Trade routes through Krek space are experiencing increasing piracy problems. Shipping insurance rates have tripled. Several major corporations are redirecting their operations to avoid Dominion territories." Guildmaster Zorplex of the Zorvak Union appeared on the communication display, his features showing the satisfaction of a successful business negotiation. "Princess Zarathul, I am pleased to report that Krek's economic expansion has become significantly less profitable. Market forces are powerful weapons when properly applied." The Zorvak contribution was elegant in its simplicity. They had not declared war on the Kreks or provided military support to the resistance. Instead, they had simply made it clear to the galactic business community that operating in Krek space involved unacceptable risks. Trade routes were diverted. Investments were withdrawn. Supply contracts were canceled. The cumulative impact was devastating to Krek's plans for rapid economic integration of conquered territories. "Economic projections indicate the Dominion is operating at a significant loss," reported Dr. Gentar during a coalition strategy session. "Occupation costs exceed territorial revenues by factors ranging from 3 to 7, depending on the system." Ambassador Velkaran of the Altarian Republic provided military intelligence that was equally encouraging. "Our monitoring stations report increasing communication traffic between Krek's territories and Central Command. Fleet movements suggest they are repositioning forces to deal with multiple security crises simultaneously." The resistance strategy was forcing the Kreks into an impossible position. They could not maintain control without massive military presence, but massive military presence prevented the economic integration that made expansion profitable. They were trapped in a cycle of escalating costs with diminishing returns, but the resistance was paying a terrible price for their success. "Casualty reports from this week's operations," Prince Kaileron announced grimly. He had been coordinating ground operations from inside Krek's controlled space, operating under deep cover as a low-level civilian administrator. 37 resistance fighters killed, 83 captured, unknown numbers of civilian casualties from retaliation operations. Each name on the casualty reports represented someone who had chosen to risk everything for the possibility of freedom. Former Imperial soldiers, civilian volunteers, off-world specialists who had joined the cause. The human advisors had proven especially vulnerable, with 6 killed in the past month during training operations that had been discovered by Krek security forces. The humans are taking disproportionate casualties, Captain Rodriguez reported. Our people are not accustomed to this level of operational security. Krek's counterintelligence is more sophisticated than anticipated. Marcus looked up from his tactical displays. We need to modify our approach. The Kreks are learning to identify our operational patterns. Time to introduce some new variables. What kind of variables? Zarathul asked. The kind that will make them question everything they think they know about this war. He activated a series of tactical projections showing Krek's military positions throughout the occupied territories. Princess, what would happen if resistance activities suddenly stopped in one sector while dramatically increasing in another? They would redeploy forces to address the new threat. Concentration, she replied, immediately. Right? And what if that redeployment triggered new resistance activities in the areas they had just abandoned? Understanding dawned. You're proposing to manipulate their force deployments by varying resistance intensity. Exactly. But it gets better. Marcus's expression took on that predatory quality that had become familiar. What if some of those new resistance activities were actually false flag operations conducted by our allies? Captain Rodriguez caught on immediately. Krek's forces respond to apparent resistance activities that are actually conducted by Altarian special operations teams. They commit resources to suppressing threats that don't exist while real resistance activities continue elsewhere. Intelligence multiplication, Dr. Gentar observed approvingly. Force them to defend against threats that exist only in their own perception. The strategy represented a fundamental evolution in their approach. Instead of simply making occupation expensive, they were actively manipulating Krek's decision-making processes. The resistance was becoming a sophisticated deception operation designed to waste enemy resources through misdirection and false information. Implementation would require extensive coordination. Prince Kaileron warned. Our allies would need to commit significant resources to operations that provide no direct benefit to their own territories. Ambassador Velkaran's voice came through the communication system with surprising firmness. Prince Kaileron, the Altarian Republic views Krek's expansion as an existential threat. We are prepared to commit whatever resources are necessary to demonstrate that expansion is not sustainable. Similar confirmations came from other coalition members. The Aetherian Confederacy offered their advanced stealth technology for infiltration operations. The Hexapod Collective volunteered to establish false resistance cells that would appear legitimate to Krek's intelligence but actually serve coalition strategic objectives. Even the normally cautious Vorthon Technical Union agreed to provide sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities that could disrupt Krek's communication and coordination systems. We have evolved beyond resistance, Zarathul realized. This has become a coalition war against Krek's hegemony, with the Veltaran territory serving as the primary battlefield. Marcus nodded grimly. The question is whether the Kreks will recognize what's happening before it's too late for them to adapt. Intelligence reports suggested that Krek Central Command was indeed becoming concerned about the cost and complexity of their Veltaran operations. Several high-ranking officials had been relieved of duty. Resource allocation debates were creating internal political tensions. Some Dominion territories were beginning to question whether expansion was worth the increasing security commitments. They have 2 choices, Captain Rodriguez observed. Escalate to total military control, which would be politically and economically devastating, or begin negotiating withdrawal, which would undermine their entire expansion strategy. Zarathul studied the tactical displays showing the scope of coalition operations. The end began with a single encrypted message broadcast simultaneously across every major communication network in the galaxy. The transmission bypassed all security protocols, appeared in multiple languages, and carried authentication codes that verified its origin from the highest levels of 6 different governments. To the Krek's Dominion Central Command, Princess Zarathul's voice echoed through space, reaching billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. The Galactic Liberation Coalition formally demands the immediate withdrawal of all Krek's occupation forces from sovereign territories. You have 72 standard hours to begin evacuation. Procedures. The message was accompanied by tactical displays showing coalition military assets that had been secretly positioning themselves throughout the galaxy for months. Altarian battle fleets had emerged from stealth positions along major Krex trade routes. Etherian infiltration teams had been discovered sabotaging critical infrastructure throughout Dominion space. Zorvac merchant vessels had revealed themselves to be disguised military platforms. What the Krex had dismissed as isolated resistance activities in one small empire was revealed to be the first phase of a coordinated galactic war. Marcus stood beside Zarathul on the bridge of the Coalition flagship, the restored Veltaran battleship Eternal Defiance. The ship had been secretly rebuilt using Vorthon technology and Corvani manufacturing capabilities, created from the wreckage of vessels lost during the Battle of Helios. It served as both a symbol of Veltaran resurgence and a demonstration of Coalition technological cooperation. Krex response incoming. Captain Rodriguez reported from her position at the tactical station. Admiral Gexnar is broadcasting on all frequencies. The holographic display activated, showing the imposing figure of the Krex Supreme Military Commander. His scaled features displayed the cold fury that had made him legendary throughout Dominion space. Princess Zarathul, you have made a grave miscalculation. The Krex Dominion does not negotiate with terrorists and insurgents. Then you have made your choice, she replied calmly. Coalition forces. Initiate Operation Restoration. Across the galaxy, the carefully coordinated plan unfolded with mathematical precision. Altarian fleets engaged Krex border patrols while broadcasting detailed intelligence about Dominion military weaknesses. Etherian agents activated sabotage operations that crippled communication networks throughout Krex space. Zorvac economic warfare tactics triggered financial panic that destabilized Dominion currency and trade systems. Most importantly, resistance cells throughout occupied territories launched simultaneous uprisings that overwhelmed Krex security forces. What had appeared to be scattered, manageable insurgency activities was revealed to be a coordinated military campaign involving millions of participants. Intelligence reports from all sectors, Dr. Gentar announced from the Coalition Command Center. Krex forces are experiencing systematic communication failures, supply line disruptions, and coordinated attacks on administrative facilities. The scope of the deception became apparent as Marcus explained the true scale of their operations to Zarathul. Princess, what we accomplished in Veltaran space was a pilot program. While the Krex focused on suppressing resistance in your territories, we were establishing similar networks throughout their empire. The revelation was staggering. The Coalition had spent months infiltrating Dominion space, establishing sleeper cells and recruiting local resistance movements. Every species that had been absorbed by Krex expansion maintained underground networks of individuals who had never accepted occupation. The Veltaran resistance had provided a template for activating all of these dormant opposition groups simultaneously. How long has this been planned? She asked. Captain Rodriguez smiled grimly. Earth intelligence began developing contingency plans for Krex expansion 3 years ago. The Altarians have been planning counter-operations for even longer. Your decision to reject their ultimatum provided the trigger event we needed to activate everything at once. Prince Kaelron coordinated resistance activities from the surface of Veltara Prime, where Krex occupation forces found themselves surrounded by a population that had transformed overnight from sullen compliance to active hostility. Sister, the capital is ours. Krex administrative personnel are requesting emergency evacuation. The psychological impact was as important as the military success. Throughout Dominion space, Krex forces discovered that their assumed control was an illusion. Local populations they had thought pacified were actually resistance networks awaiting activation. Administrative systems they had trusted were riddled with Coalition agents. Supply chains they had depended on were controlled by hostile forces. Krex Central Command is broadcasting emergency mobilization orders, reported Thekvar from his mining platform command center. They are attempting to consolidate their remaining forces around core worlds. Let them, Marcus replied. Consolidation means abandoning their outer territories. Every system they evacuate becomes a Coalition victory. The strategic brilliance of the approach was becoming clear. The Krex could not simultaneously defend their core territories, maintain occupation forces throughout their empire, and respond to uprising activities in dozens of systems. They were forced to choose between protecting their homeland and maintaining their conquests. Guildmaster Zorplex provided the economic analysis that confirmed coalition success. Krek's financial markets have collapsed. Their currency has lost 60% of its value in the past 48 hours. Major trading partners are canceling contracts and demanding immediate payment for existing obligations. The Dominion was discovering that their expansion had made them economically vulnerable. They had become dependent on resources and trade relationships that were now controlled by hostile forces. Military conquest meant nothing. If the conquered territories were economically worthless, Admiral Gexnar made one final attempt to salvage the situation through a direct communication with coalition leadership. His image appeared on the main display, showing obvious signs of strain and fatigue. Princess Zarathul, the Krek's Dominion is prepared to negotiate terms for cessation of hostilities. We can discuss territorial adjustments and compensation arrangements. Admiral, she replied with the same formal courtesy she had learned during her diplomatic training. The Galactic Liberation Coalition does not negotiate with occupying forces. We accept only complete withdrawal from all sovereign territories and formal recognition of galactic independence principles. You are demanding the dissolution of the Dominion itself. I am demanding that the Dominion learn to coexist with other species. Instead of absorbing them, the communication ended with Admiral Gexnar's image flickering off the display. Within hours, Krek's evacuation fleets began departing from occupation zones throughout the galaxy. The withdrawal was chaotic and expensive, conducted under constant harassment from coalition forces and local resistance movements. They are keeping their word, Captain Rodriguez observed as monitoring stations tracked the evacuation progress. Krek's forces are pulling back to their pre-expansion boundaries. Ambassador Velkaran provided the diplomatic perspective from the Coalition Council. Princess, the Altarian Republic is prepared to recognize the restored Veltaran Empire and provide security guarantees against future aggression. Similar commitments are being made by all coalition members. The victory was complete, but Zarathul found herself thinking about the young human student who had approached her at the academy with impossible suggestions about asymmetric warfare. Marcus stood beside her now, no longer a mysterious advisor but a proven architect of galactic transformation. Marcus, she said quietly, when you first suggested this approach, did you believe it would succeed? He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. I believed it was the only option that offered hope. Whether it would succeed depended on variables I couldn't control, such as whether a princess trained in diplomacy and honor could learn to think like a revolutionary, whether traditional military officers could adapt to unconventional warfare, whether independent species could work together instead of competing for advantage. She looked at the tactical displays showing coalition forces throughout the galaxy, former enemies now working together to maintain the peace they had fought to achieve. The Galactic Liberation Coalition had evolved from a desperate resistance movement into a new form of interspecies cooperation. The war is over, she observed, but what we have built will last longer than any empire. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, the expression was entirely peaceful. Princess, I think you have learned something even more valuable than asymmetric warfare. What is that? How to turn defeat into transformation. Princess Zarathul, heir to an empire that had died and been reborn as something greater, looked out at the stars that now belonged to free peoples everywhere. The alien princess who had been ready to yield had instead yielded nothing, and in doing so had changed the galaxy forever. The age of conquest was over. The age of cooperation had begun.